We're waiting on one juror.
Please rise for the jury.
Please be seated, everyone. The record will show that the jury has rejoined counsel and Mr. Burns in open court. And Mr. Maybanks, you may resume direct examination of Ms. Sauer.
May I approach witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Beginning the witness, what's been previously introduced as 17J1. Briefly. Linda, this is that laboratory receipt, that chain of custody document that refers to items of evidence that were submitted in 2002. You see where it says item H?
Yes.
You had some trouble remembering earlier what item H was, so.
Yes, I didn't have this particular sheet, so that was this blood from the steering wheel.
Okay, blood from the steering wheel. Thank you. We were talking before we went to break about your findings in regards to the third time the dress was submitted to you. The exhibit that we introduced into evidence was State's Exhibit 9D as in dog. So I want to talk a little bit more about that analysis here, and if we could publish that again, Your Honor.
You may.
You said in your report that the previous testing had, on the black dress, had developed matching DNA profiles at 4 locations. Is that in reference to the 2003 report?
Yes.
Okay. And when you did testing at these additional locations, these 4 additional locations, what number did you attribute to those?
Oh, they were stains number or cuttings number 5, 6, 7, and 8.
And are those described there in your report as number 5, lower back?
Yes.
Number 6, left front below side shearing?
Yes.
Number 7, left of center on front below the waist?
Yes.
And number 8, upper left back?
Yes.
Okay. And by shearing, do you mean that the kind of what's on the waist of the dress?
Ruching, yeah.
Okay. I don't know what that is either.
Obviously, you don't watch the bride shows.
I don't wear dresses. And that's true. Okay. So with respect to these areas here, were you able to confirm by the screening test that they all indicated the presence of blood?
Yes.
Okay. And your report here says that female profiles were developed from 6, 7, and 8. Is that right?
Yes.
And did those female profiles all match the profiles from the earlier reports we talked about?
Yes.
And are we operating under the continued belief here, given the nature of the offense and the finding of blood now in numerous locations, that this is the blood of Michelle Martinko?
Yes.
You also indicated in this that this finding that fewer than 1 in 100 billion unrelated individuals would have the same. Oh, that's too fast. Okay. All right. We're going to skip that for now and go down to state number 5 anyway. So let's talk about state number 5 here. You indicated a partial male profile with complete DNA results at 11 STR loci and partial results at an additional 2 loci were obtained. Can you describe that finding, if you would?
Well, it meant that I had what I felt were complete results at 9 of these 15 areas, and 2 results that were weak, and so I couldn't say whether or not they were a homozygous, which is when an individual has a repeat of the same number, or whether there was something that had dropped out, a result that didn't show. So I called them partial instead of complete.
I think you just said that you had 9, but your report says 11 on state number 5?
11. Okay.
All right. And that's 11 STR loci out of how many you tested for then?
15 is what the kits test for.
So when you applied this kit, you could obtain a full profile if you had 15, like you did with Michelle's blood, right?
Yes,
Or you could find it at 11 of the 15, which you indicated, right?
yes,
And then, as you described, a partial result at an additional 2.
yes.
When you say a partial profile, you also told us that you believed that it was complete DNA results. Can you explain just kind of what that means, that terminology?
Okay, complete profile means you have results at all 15 loci. On this particular sample, some of the larger DNA segments did not show in the testing. So I felt I had complete profile, the 2 alleles, or I could say that it was 1 allele that was the profile at the 11 loci that I said were complete.
Can you tell us, and I'm not sure we explained this term, but what do you mean by allele?
Allele is what we call the options. So each of the numbered repeats would be called an allele. So if you, for any gene or whatever, the 2 possibilities are if there's a major or a dominant and recessive, then we call the 2 alleles.
Okay.
Okay.
So the loci is referred to as the location, and
Yes.
the allele is the result.
Yes.
And with regard to state number 5, and this finding continues on the next page, see if we can get it to we're not going to be able to see the whole thing, but you were able to translate that finding into a statistic. So my question is, what, if any, statistical significance was generated from this profile that you found?
Okay, from a statistical standpoint, the probability of finding another or more than one individual with that particular profile would be greater than 1 in 100 billion. That was the largest number we decided to use.
Tell me about that. How you came to 100 billion.
Well, how we decided?
Yeah.
I don't think I decided. I think it was DNA analysts in general, and probably with statistical help from a statistician.
And was that a finding that was one that was employed on a regular basis with the laboratory and generally accepted?
Yes.
Okay. So the statistical finding means that there's the probability of finding more than one individual with this profile would be, did you say greater?
Yes, would be greater.
And based upon this finding, tell me, is this similar to a conclusion that you had found somebody who you believed, a profile that you believed belonged to one individual?
Repeat that, please.
Does this equate to a finding that you could say that you developed a profile of an individual from that?
It would be likely that it was. Just because we say the chances are very slim doesn't mean that, it couldn't happen.
Okay.
We're talking statistics.
Okay. All right. So in the report, you say fewer than 1 in 1 billion unrelated individuals would have the same partial male profile. Is that right?
Yes.
Did I say 1? I said 100 billion, right? Okay. It's not me. All right. In terms of DNA analysis and STR testing at that time, why is this a significant finding?
Most people would say that it assumes identity. That if you have a result that is found in fewer than 1 in 100 billion, and we only have 3 to 4 billion people on Earth, that the probability of finding 2 unrelated individuals is so small that it can be discounted.
With this type of profile being developed as you just described, does that provide you as a DNA, DCI, DNA criminalist to be able to compare what you developed to known profiles?
Yes.
And did that provide you the opportunity that if you were to compare this to known individuals, you could potentially find what could be deemed as a match to the profile?
Yes.
The report also notes that Exhibit I was compared to state number 5. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell us about your finding in regards to Exhibit I when the male contributor from state number 5 was compared to it?
Results from a second minor contributor. The donor of the F5, the major donor, I think could not be eliminated from the shift selector.
And when you say could not be eliminated, what does that mean in terms of what you found when you actually compared what you had for a profile from F5, from stain 5, and from Exhibit I?
That there were no alleles or results present that would indicate that the donor of sample F5 could not have given or provided.
In those terms, then, when you compared the profile you developed from F5 in the profile developed from Exhibit I, where you could compare those profiles at the alleles, was there a match?
It gets a little dicey. I wouldn't say necessarily matched because we had 2 contributors. And there's nothing in the analysis. If I have 3 like peaks, it indicates 3 alleles, and any one single individual can only have 2. But it doesn't tell me which came from the male and which came from the female. So while the stain from Michelle Martinko's dress, that was female blood, could not be eliminated, and so too could this eye sample not be eliminated. But it doesn't mean that I can assign identity or probabilities or anything.
So with what you had to compare, you could say that the findings were similar and consistent to between the profile, the male profile in I and F5, but because of Michelle's presence, you can't make the ultimate finding.
Right. I can say that it's consistent with. I'm not even sure on I that I had sufficiently strong sample to definitely say it was Michelle's. I mean, it seems logical in that she was bleeding, but that doesn't necessarily mean there couldn't be another explanation.
Okay. And when it comes to Exhibit I, I'm glad you brought that up. Was the DNA profile, the mixture you developed, one that was screened positive for blood?
Oh,
From
yes.
blood?
we always determine that there's some sort of source of DNA, at least I did, before performing DNA analysis, because it is time-consuming and expensive. So there really isn't any point in just finding a stain and running DNA to see what you get.
Now, in terms of stain number 5, and you've already kind of spoken to this, but was there a second minor contributor found with stain number 5?
Yes.
And was that second minor contributor compared to the stains from the profile developed from Exhibit F that was presumed to be Michelle's for the reasons we discussed?
Yes,
And what was found in that regards?
that she was a possible contributor.
So in that sense, did you find evidence that the blood from the profile you were able to develop from the male individual was within or contained within also the blood of Michelle? Or was found to be present as a contributor?
I can say that I was able, at most of the loci, to determine what was the profile of what we called the major contributor, and I could say what were the alleles contributed by the minor contributor, but I don't know that that would be the only explanation.
Yeah. Let me approach the witness, please, Your Honor.
You may.
And this is State's Exhibit 9D as in dog 1. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes.
Okay. And what is this exhibit as you look at it?
My bench notes for Exhibit F, examined on 10/31 of 2005.
And does this contain notes that you made at the time you examined the address in October of 2005?
Yes,
Did you note the description of the areas where you found the blood stains that you talked about today on this document as well?
yes,
Does that appear to be a fair and accurate document of your notes?
yes.
Move to admit 9D1.
Any objection to 9D as in dog 1?
No objection, thank you.
9D1 will be received and made part of the record.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
You may.
Any witness what's been marked as State's Exhibit 9E for identification. Do you see that, Linda?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us what 9E is?
This is a summary of the 16 loci that were tested by the kit. And it's called a PowerPlex kit because that's what the manufacturer called it. And it says F5.
Does that indicate the findings then that you compiled and came up with in regard to the testing you performed on stain F5?
Yes,
Does that appear to be a fair and accurate document of those containing those findings?
yes,
Was that then generated at the time that you made those findings?
yes,
And was it kept with the DCI records as a business record?
yes.
Move to admit State's 9E, Your Honor.
Any objection to 9E?
If I may question the witness very quickly, Your Honor.
You may.
Ms. Sauer, in State's Exhibit number 9E, does this describe, in part, the populations to which you referred in making your calculations about the probability?
The calculation, it does not involve the different groups, but the statistics could be figured for the different groups. And for a while, DNA was being reported as what the statistics were in 3 major groups, which were Caucasians, African Americans, and Hispanic. Now, I wasn't pleased when I learned how the companies who did the testing to make the statistical analysis, they used blood samples that had been submitted for other reasons to a large research lab. And they only knew, in the case of what they called a Hispanic individual, that they had a Hispanic name. And not everyone who has a Hispanic name, especially if you're a married female, should be included in that. So eventually, we found that there really were not significant differences in hardly any group. So we only reported as just one number. It does list the 3, because that's what they were doing at that time.
In 2005?
Yeah. And see, there's nothing on the stain that tells me anything about the individual who donated that blood.
In what manner did you use those 3 columns, Caucasian, African American, and Hispanic, in making your calculations?
I didn't. That's just how the statistical program had been set up. All I do is to type in the numbers.
You didn't do the calculation yourself?
No, no. In fact, it says that this page was created on 7/9/02 by MJP, referring to Michael J. Peterson.
So State's Exhibit 9E is not something that you produced?
The page I produced because I put in the results, the alleles, the second column, there on the left. So it gives the calculation for that particular sample. But no, I did not individually do the calculations. A computer did.
And did Mr. Peterson do this for you?
We did it for the whole DNA section.
So stated differently, is 9E going to be helpful to the jury in understanding either the calculations leading to the statistic about which you testified or the testing that you did?
It depends on how much time they want to spend trying to figure it out. It's not readily, evident, I don't think, to a layperson what is being done. It does, however, give a summary of the results in a clear fashion.
Given the witness's testimony, Your Honor, under Rule 5.413, we find that the exhibit is not helpful to the jury, and so we object.
Any response to the objection, Mr. Maybanks?
At this time, we believe that the witness has established that would be helpful to the jury, and that she entered the information that came from the
testing that she conducted on it in regards to the findings on the loci and the alleles for the DNA profile.
Okay. Based upon Ms. Sauer's testimony that there is an accurate description of the analysis and results that she arrived at, the court will accept and receive into evidence State's Exhibit 9E.
And to follow up with that, as can we publish that, Your Honor?
You may.
To follow up that as it's being published, Linda, can you explain to us then, based upon the testing materials that you had and how you conducted tests, that figure that you talked about earlier, that 1 in 100 billion, is that figure that you put in the report then something that coincides with your training and how to report these findings?
Yes.
Okay. Now, above you is State's Exhibit 9E. That has some information on it. So could you just kind of tell us in the first column there is a indication of the locus. Is that the loci areas of the?
Yes, plural of locus is loci.
Yes.
And they have different names. Some of them are named by their location on a chromosome. So you'll see a number that says D, and so that means that it is from a DNA molecule rather than from an RNA molecule. And then it will have an S number, which refers to the site. And how they started naming, the nomenclature they were using when they were locating different important areas on chromosomes was really not like a map to tell you exactly where it was. It was rather that this was the 1358th locus that had been found on the chromosome D3. Kind of disappointing that it's not a map.
Linda, then, is this document then meant to set forth the findings that you made as a result of your DNA testing, so it could be used at a later date to potentially compare to the findings of a known profile?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. May I approach witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Linda, I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 9F for identification. And do you see that document? Have you seen it before?
Yes.
And what does that document indicate?
This is the summary of the minor donor from the shift selector.
And is this, as you indicated in the previous reports, then the minor donor from the shift selector believed to be the male contributor to the mixture?
Yes.
And is that a document that was also similar to 9E, used to compile your findings along the loci so it can be preserved and compared to future profiles that may be developed?
Yes.
Okay. And is that also a fair and accurate copy of a record kept in the regular business at the DCI?
Yes.
In with respect to the matters involving the calculations and whatnot, it appears to be the same as the previous document?
It is, but it's nowhere as rare as the earlier one because there are many fewer results.
And right, yeah, and we talked about that in terms of the minor contributor to Exhibit I being compared to F5 and matching out those loci and whatnot before, but not being able to calculate the same statistic. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now, thank you, Linda. Actually, can we publish this really quick here, so we can all take a look at it? No, I'm sorry. No. I'd like to offer in evidence, Your Honor.
Okay. 9F.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Any objection to 9F?
On the same basis, Your Honor, that it's not helpful to the jury under Rule 5403, we object.
Over defendant's objection, the court will receive 9F. You may publish it.
Yeah. I'm sorry for that, Your Honor.
That's okay.
Late on a Friday. And do you still have that in front of you, Linda?
Yes.
Okay. As we see here on State's Exhibit 9F, that contains, again, the markings and the findings that you compiled as a result of your analysis on the minor donor shift selector.
Yes.
In that first column under the alleles, is that intended to represent your findings from the DNA analysis process?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. May I approach the witness again, Your Honor?
You may.
Any witness, what's been marked as 7B as in boy to 7N. If you would just take a look at those briefly there, Linda, and or if you've seen them before today, do they represent pictures of the Exhibit F address?
Yes. The photograph was taken pulling the skirt full out so that you could see the distance and location of the various stains.
And I haven't offered it quite yet, so if you could put it down, I'm sorry about that. The 7B and 7C, are those photographs of the front and then in 7C the back of the dress?
Yes.
And then we have in 7D and 7E here, do you recognize those photographs?
I think they probably were my photographs.
Those photographs you took at the time of your analyses of the dress?
Yes.
And do those photographs indicate locations where you took the extracts and did the DNA testing that we've discussed here in court today?
Yes.
Okay.
Except,
And then in state's exhibits, well, let's stay with those for now. 7B, C, D, and E. Okay.
Do those represent fair and accurate depictions of the condition of the dress as indicated by the various areas of testing that you did on the dress?
yes.
Move to enter states at this point in time 7B, C, D, as in dog, and E.
Mr. Spees, have you had an opportunity to review those proposed exhibits?
Yes, I have, Your Honor. We have no objection.
The court will receive and make part of the record states 7B as in boy through and including 7E as in excellent. They will be made part of the record.
Permission to publish, Your Honor?
You may.
Yeah, we'll take a look at 7B as in boy first, Linda, if you still have that in front of you. Does 7B then indicate a photograph of the, front of Michelle's dress, indicating areas that where you performed DNA testing as marked?
Yes.
And does that also include towards the top there a tag with, I think we looked at it before, a Q9 on it?
Yes.
Okay. And we can look at 7C now.
Got it?
Okay. And does 7C show, as indicated by the card next to it, the back of Michelle's dress, again with areas indicated where DNA testing was performed by you?
Correct.
And if we could go to 7D. And this looks like a photograph, as you described here, of that you took. Is that right?
Yes.
And does this photograph describe by number the various areas contained in the reports that we discussed and that you described for us today that you tested and performed DNA analysis on.
Yes.
And if we could look at 7E now. 7D containing a photo of the front of the dress. The 7E show the back area of the dress.
Yes.
And is that a photograph that you took as well?
Yes.
And does that show, again, the areas where you performed the DNA testing that we talked about here today?
Yes.
May I retrieve proposed 7A again, Your Honor?
You may.
Do those photographs, Linda, coincide with what is on state's proposed Exhibit 7A, as indicated by you, the same areas that you examined on Michelle's dress that you talked about here today and that's contained in the reports?
Yes.
And as you testified to earlier, the dress appears in similar condition.
Yes.
At this time, we'll move to enter State 7A, Your Honor.
Any objection to 7A at this time, Mr. Spees?
I'm sorry, Mayor, what into it?
You may.
Ms. Ostauer, please take a look at State's Exhibit 7C.
Yes. I mentioned that earlier, not in court, but it shows,
Mentioned it to whom?
oh, just when I was reviewing the notes.
No, who did you mention it to?
The county attorney.
Mr. Maybanks?
Yeah.
What did you mention?
I mentioned that there were multiple cuttings from Area 5.
And you didn't do that?
No, I only did one cutting.
You object to 7A not being in a condition with which the witness is familiar. There's been no adequate foundation.
Response to the objection, Mr. Maybanks.
Your Honor, at this time, the state will withdraw its motion to admit the evidence for the time being.
Okay, thank you.
If we could, then, the remainder of the exhibits. We'll start with 7F and 7G. First, in 7F here, does that indicate to you the area of F5 on the back of Michelle's dress?
Yes.
And is that representative of the area where you obtained the blood stain that was discussed here in court, referred to as F5?
Yes.
And on 7G, does that also refer to that area?
Yes.
And on proposed State's Exhibit 7A, is that area contained on the bottom of this dress?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm reminded that I don't believe the state made a formal motion to admit 9C1. we did. That's great. We make that motion now.
Okay. And by way of reminder, Mr. Spies, 9C1 is proposed exhibit. They are bench notes referring to the 2003 examination of Exhibit F, of what was marked as DCI F, I believe?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to review 9C1?
Yes,
And do you have any objection to 9C1?
we do not.
9C1 will be received and made part of the record.
With that, we have no questions, further questions at this time.
Cross-examination, Mr. Spies.
Yes, Your Honor, just before doing so, for clarification, 9F and G have not been offered, right?
Correct. That's by my record, yeah.
Yes.
Have we removed 7A so I have a clear view of the witness?
Oh, yes, of course.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sauer.
Good afternoon, sir.
Ms. Sauer, in the analysis that you did and about which you testified this afternoon, in all of the work that you do, the work that you do is on evidence that you receive from law enforcement agencies that are delivered to the DCI laboratory, right?
That is correct.
And so you may not know the history of the exhibits that you eventually receive and analyze.
That's correct.
You get a
Mr. Spies?
description from the submitting agency, the DCI laboratory gives it its own designation, and off you go with your work.
Yes.
Okay,
Mr. Spies, I apologize for interrupting. Could you turn your mic on?
there you go.
Thank you.
So as far as the integrity and the presence or absence of any contamination of the exhibits that you look at, you don't know about that.
No, I really don't know how it has been handled. Many times, though, the packaging is in some way sealed and with tape put across it so that if it has been opened before I get it, then I would note that.
Correct. And so your first analysis in this case was conducted in 2002, and we know from testimony from Michael Peterson earlier in these proceedings that he examined some of the same things in 1997, right?
Yes.
And by the way, did you confer with Mr. Peterson in the course of your work?
Yes.
He's a colleague and also an examiner that did DNA testing, right?
Yes, he is the supervisor of the DNA section,
Okay.
or was. He's retired too.
So what I wanted to ask you about first, in directing your attention to 2002, you examined item F, which was submitted as the dress and pantyhose and panties, right?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. In examining the dress, and by the way, was Exhibit F just a conglomeration of all those three exhibits?
Yes, they were all in the same container.
Okay, and we've heard that from other witnesses as well. When you examined the dress, did you notice hair on it?
No.
And I think earlier in your testimony that at some point in your work at the laboratory, there was a section that examined hairs, right?
Yes.
But you didn't notice any hair on Exhibit F, the dress?
No.
Let's turn to the number of spots on the dress that you looked at in 2002. How many did you identify in 2002?
In 2002, I only selected one heavily stained area so that I could just get a profile.
Gotcha. So you had a mission in mind to determine what the profile was of that one spot.
Yes,
And you also in 2002 looked at the Exhibit H.
yes.
And Exhibit H is shown in State's Exhibit 9B was what?
It was blood stain from the steering wheel.
And in your analysis of the blood on the steering wheel, which was Laboratory Exhibit H, you weren't able to determine a DNA profile on that, were you?
No,
And was the reason that you weren't able to develop a DNA profile on the steering wheel blood was that there just wasn't enough blood to test?
I believe so.
Next, you analyzed Exhibit I, which you called the shift selector.
Yes,
And was the item I that you examined the actual physical knob on the shift selector?
I believe so, yes.
You believe so or you know so?
Yeah, I swabbed the area, so I transferred it to a swab. It had to be the object.
And was this the same Exhibit I that Michael Peterson examined in 1997?
Yes,
Wasn't it true, Ms. Sawyer, that in 1997, Mr. Peterson examined a tape lift from the shift selector?
perhaps. I don't know what Mr. Peterson found.
If I were to show you his report of that examination, would that help you know?
Would tell me what's in the report. Would still not give me independent knowledge.
This is Exhibit 9A, which has been received in evidence when Mr. Peterson testified. And can you tell us what he examined as Exhibit I?
DNA isolated from the tape lift of the steering wheel was insufficient for analysis.
I'm talking about Exhibit I.
DNA isolated from the tape lift of Exhibit I was profiled as shown in the table.
The tape lift of the shift selector.
Yes. So it indicates they were both tape lifts that he examined.
All right. And in fact, in his report of 1997, on page 3 of Exhibit 9A, what is Exhibit I identified as?
Sealed envelope containing blood from the shift selector.
Not the shift selector itself.
Apparently not.
So is the Exhibit I that you examined the same Exhibit I that Mr. Peterson examined?
I would assume that it is because of the designation of the letter. I don't know whether I had the item submitted to me or not. I mean, he obviously did not have the item.
Well, there was only one Exhibit I, though, wasn't there?
Yes. But, yes. But I'm not sure whether I did tape lifts. I'm sorry, I really can't remember.
I didn't catch your answer. That you can't remember.
I can't remember what Exhibit I looked like in 2002.
You told us that you took a swab from.
I thought that I did because I had written down that I cut a swab. But I still could have taken a swab from a tape lift.
But I understood your testimony. You had taken a swab from a hard object.
That's what I thought that I had because I used a swab.
You've told us this afternoon that the mixture from Exhibit I, whatever it was
Yes.
blood.
Yes, it did screen positive for blood, so it did contain some blood.
But you don't know that it was all blood, though, do you?
No, no.
So this, earlier today, Mr. Peterson was quick to correct himself when he first said blood, and he said it was a mixture of DNA.
Well, it was a mixture of DNA, but it also screened positive for blood.
But you can't tell that everything that was on Exhibit I was from blood, can you?
No.
Let's turn to your work in 2003, okay?
Okay.
In 2003, you this time had both the pantyhose and the underpants and the dress, and this time the scarf came with it, didn't it?
Yes.
And was the scarf again bundled together with the other items?
They were all in the same package.
Bundled together.
I think so.
But in 2003, you did not examine the scarf or the pantyhose, did you?
No.
In examining the underpants, though, you did detect some spermatozoa, didn't you?
I did.
And did you test the spermatozoa?
I attempted to do a DNA analysis, but did not develop a profile.
Just what, that there wasn't enough material there to test?
I believe so, because the number of spermatozoa were not plentiful.
But it would be safe to say that that would have, if there had been enough, it would have generated a male profile of some sort.
Yes.
In 2003, when you looked at the dress, did you look at both the front and the back of the dress?
Yes.
And you told us that you were using an alternative light source.
Yes.
And was this just a high-intensity light, or was it?
It's a high-intensity light. Before we had alternate light source, we would use a high-intensity beam from a flashlight.
Okay. Would this be similar to like a black light?
No, it wasn't a black light, because black light gets fluorescence from a certain wavelength, and blood does not fluoresce.
Okay. So when I use a black light to find where my dog is urinated in the living room, that's different than the light source that you used.
Yes, it might be, what should I say? There were several different wavelengths so that you could look for the fluorescence at different wavelengths of light. When you use a black light, that will just be one of the wavelengths.
Okay, so in using this alternative light source in 2003 to look at the dress, did you use that both on the front and the back of the dress?
Probably. I don't have independent recollection of that.
And it was by use of this alternative light source that you were able to identify some additional blood spots on the dress that you hadn't seen in 2002.
Yes. I really didn't, I don't think, record how many blood stains I saw. In general, on the black dress, I cannot just say by looking at it that it is blood, because the color of the dried blood blends too much with the black fabric. So if I see something that appears to be a difference in texture or smoothness on the fabric, then I would use a swab to get a small portion and check that for blood. After that, then I could say it was a blood stain.
And in fact, you did testify about using a screening test.
Yes.
And a screening test is also called a presumptive test.
It is.
And a presumptive test helps you identify whether something may or may not be blood, but it's not what would be called a confirmatory test.
We use more than one screening test. We do two. And you have to have both of them positive to be sure that it is blood. Now, it still doesn't tell you whether it was human blood or deer blood or some other source of blood, but the two confirmatory tests does confirm at least the presence of blood.
But you used presumptive test.
Either can be used as a presumptive test, but together they make a definitive test.
What two presumptive tests did you use in 2003?
Phenolphthalein, and I can't remember the name of the blue one. Phenolphthalein goes from colorless to pink, almost a fuchsia, and the other one turns like a teal green.
In 2002, did the Division of Criminal Investigation have a procedure for using the presumptive detection of blood in suspected stains?
Yes,
And is that the test about which you're testifying?
the tests?
Yes.
Yes.
Did that procedure call for two tests?
Yes, unless, well, since both have to be positive, if you test using one and the test is negative, you don't go ahead and do the second one. Because the reason for doing the two is so that you do not have a reaction from another substance that could possibly give you the color change. And so since the two work the same but are different chemicals, you're very unlikely to find, in fact, I don't know, I was taught that it is confirmatory when you use two because they don't have the same false positives.
But you would agree with me, though, that there was a procedure in 2002, effective November 6th of 2002, that talked about the presumptive detection of blood in suspected stains.
Yeah, we always had. Probably was one before that, too.
So with that, let's turn to 2005, okay?
Okay,
All right. In 2005, you re-examined the dress, item F, and item F, this time, did that include the pantyhose, the dress, the underpants, and the scarf?
yes,
All right. Bundled together still?
yes, but I think I might have wrapped them each in separate white paper when I analyzed them the first time.
Any rabbit fur on the dress this time?
I don't remember seeing any rabbit fur,
At any time?
no. But then I will admit that I wasn't really looking for hairs.
Well, anytime you examine an item of evidence, you look for trace evidence as well, don't you?
Not nearly as much as we used to, because the DNA testing is so much more precise than anything you can do with trace evidence.
I believe I understand that, but if you saw some foreign matter on the dress, you would make note of that, wouldn't you?
I probably would make note of it, but I don't think I would attempt to analyze it.
No, I'm not saying whether you would analyze it, but whether you would note that it was there.
Yes, I don't remember seeing hair.
And again, in 2005, did you do the same presumptive tests again?
Yes,
And this time, you detected some spots on the dress that you hadn't identified in 2002 or 2003.
I can't say that I hadn't identified them. I had not selected them for testing. So I may have seen something with the bright light, but I was attempting to cut stains from a variety of areas. So my goal was just to find out what the profile I could obtain from various spots on the dress. I was not attempting to identify every stain. on the dress.
Yeah, and I think you've answered my question, but in 2002 and 2003, you didn't denote more than 4 stains.
I said that I sampled 4 stains.
Did you note in your bench notes that there were more stains than that, or you just
I knew that the one on the back that I did the first time was a broader stain. I don't know that I ever attempted to determine the boundary of it. I just took a portion.
In 2005, did you make an effort to denote the boundaries of the stains?
I did, because 2 of them were not visible to me just by the eye.
In which stains did you make a notation or identify a boundary in 2005?
They all had, the circles were the areas where the testing was done on the photographs. Again, it is hard to mark areas on a black fabric, so I had used a white marker. But even with a white marker, you know, I don't know how complete.
Do you recall whether you marked spot F5 with a marker?
No, I don't. It doesn't seem to have any marker on the photograph, the color photograph. I did not see, I only could kind of point to what the area was on the photograph that I took.
And so, just to make sure I understand, you did not mark a boundary on F5?
Not that I remember, or not that I have a photograph of, so I couldn't really tell you.
Would, looking at proposed 7F, help you remember?
7F is here.
Alternatively, let me show you how Judge may approach.
You may.
First, we'll take a look at 7C, which has been received into evidence.
I do not see any marking there. But then I'm not seeing markings on the other ones.
Beg your pardon?
I don't see markings on the other stains on the back of the dress.
Yeah, I'm just asking about the spot F5. It doesn't appear that there's any marking to identify a boundary, is there?
No. But this photograph was also taken years after I examined the dress. Those were not taken by me.
Well, let's take a look at 7B.
You see a marking around those?
Yes, some of them. There are.
So the 7B, the front of the dress, does show markings that you made to identify the perimeter.
On some. There are 2 here.
Just let me finish the question.
Sorry.
That show the perimeter of the stains that you identified on the front of the dress.
The stain was contained within that area. I didn't attempt to determine the boundary of the stain, but simply the area on the dress where the cutting was taken.
So at least on the front of the dress, as shown in Exhibit 7B, your white markings still appear.
Yes.
Would it be accurate to characterize what you detected at site F5 as being a mixture of DNA?
Yes, there were signs of a second contributor.
And because it was a mixture, as you identified, there was a major contributor and a minor contributor at F5?
Yes.
And you've already told us that the male profile was a partial profile, right?
Did not have results at least 2 loci and incomplete results at another 2.
And importantly, Ms. Sawyer, the male contributor profile at F5, you cannot say whether it came from blood or from sweat or from saliva, can you?
No, I can only say that there was blood present in the area that was cut.
And again, the male profile, you cannot say it came from mucus or from blood or from saliva.
No.
Just turning very briefly to the statistical probability about which you testified this afternoon.
Yes.
The statistic that you gave is really a statistical probability of coincidence, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's not a statistical probability that only one person on Earth could have that profile.
Well, it's an estimation of how many different individuals you would expect to examine before you found a coincidental match.
A probability of coincidence,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, you talked about the 3 potential population configurations that are shown in a couple of the government's exhibits. Did you or did the computer, in calculating that probability, use those 3 populations as a foundation for this?
The program was written to calculate the statistics in all 3 of those groups.
Okay. So finally, Ms. Sawyer, just as you can't say what kind of biological source, what the biological source was of the male profile in F5, you can't say when that biological material arrived on that dress or how, can you?
No, only that it was there before it came to me.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Counsel, could you approach quick? Thank you, counsel. Redirect Mr. Maybanks.
Yes, Your Honor. Linda, so with regard to the statistical probability, Mr. Spees referred to it as, it could also be viewed as a coincidence. Based upon your training and experience dealing with these statistics, when you described it in your report and on the stand, you said that you would only expect to find this profile and individual profile and, based upon the statistics in 1 in 100 billion people, right?
Correct.
And was it your testimony that the 100 billion, could that be an underestimate?
It could. In looking at the statistical sheets, I don't remember the notation that was being used, but I think it was decimal points.
Okay. And so, based upon the calculation that you did at the time, is that the statistic then that was generated from the technology and that was generally accepted in the field and still is?
Yes. I will have to tell you, though, I don't know exactly where Mr. Peterson obtained his statistics. I don't know if he was using FBI statistics. We kept some of our own, but we certainly didn't have enough people in ours to say that it was, we had a good statistical sample.
But it came from a database that was being used on a regular basis
Yes.
for your findings,
Yes.
and being used in other criminal investigations as well.
Yes. And it was the one that had been determined by, the section leader, that this is how we would report statistics.
And is that done then also to reach a point with the profile where you can have enough information, enough confidence that you can be able to compare that to a known profile for further examination?
Yes.
With respect to the finding of blood on the dress, when Mr. Peterson testified earlier, he said that, in the record I will speak for itself and what the jury recalls, that he said that there was blood, but he didn't know what else there could be in that finding. Do you believe that to be an accurate description of the
Yes.
finding? And with regard to Exhibit I want to show you a document that's been already entered into evidence as 17I. And in fairness, I don't think you had a chance to see this document with respect to I before you testified about how you performed the analysis on it. I is described as blood.
From the steering wheel.
Blood from the shift selector. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, and so previous testimony in this case has been received that blood scrapings were taken from the steering wheel, placed in an envelope, and submitted.
Okay.
All right. So, and it maybe wasn't exactly fair for you, but given the description here in that previous testimony, do you believe that you did the testing on blood that was obtained from the shift selector based on these?
That's really all I know, is that it contained blood.
When you receive a dress, when you receive this dress, I guess, we'll just talk about this dress, and it comes into your custody on these 3 different occasions, did you attempt or endeavor to try to test every location where you found blood each time it came in?
No. In fact, I never even endeavored to find every blood stain on the dress. I was only looking for areas that looked different that might have blood to be a sample.
So you receive it in 02 to develop the profile of the victim, receive it in 03, test a few more areas, receive it in 05, find a few more. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So was the test in 03 that you did meant to be comprehensive of the entire dress? Was the test in 03 meant to be comprehensive of all possible blood stains? Is that practical?
No, it was meant to represent different areas of the dress where blood was found. Can almost never test every area on such a large object to know whether or not, there was blood there. I assume that I would have been asked to do more stains if I had not found something foreign to the other blood.
Okay. Really quick here with regards to State's proposed Exhibit 7A. I want to indicate on the bottom area here where it's been noted in the pictures as F5. Do you see that?
Yes.
And in this area F5, you noted when on the stand earlier that there were some additional cuttings taken from the one you
Yes.
did. Were there any additional cuttings taken after you did your examination in 05?
Well, that would be an assumption, but I did one cutting and now there are 5.
Okay, so what you're saying
And
is
I didn't do it.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, you also did some testing on cigarette butts, right?
Correct.
And you weren't able to gather a DNA profile from a couple of those cigarette butts?
Correct.
And we talked about a little bit about the steering wheel, but you weren't able to get a profile from that, too.
That's correct.
So you were asked about sperm in Michelle's underwear,
Yes.
but you didn't find anything from that, right?
I didn't find any DNA profile. I did find microscopically a few spermatozoa.
But did that, without a DNA profile, is that an important or significant finding for you?
Well, I don't know what is significant because I'm not the investigator.
I'm just saying there were other areas where you didn't find a DNA profile, but you were asked about the sperm, so, but you didn't find anything on that, right?
No.
Okay. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Additional cross-examination, Mr. Spees.
No further questions necessary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You may step down, Ms. Sauer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we will adjourn for the day and for the week. I apologize for keeping you late. I could see that, or I was hoping that we could finish with a witness today rather than have her come back next week, but I do apologize for taking more of your time than I told you we would. But we will adjourn for the weekend. It is essential in order for you to abide by the oath that I gave you at the start of the evidence, that you not discuss this, that you not make up your mind, that you keep an open mind, that you not discuss it with amongst yourselves, with any loved ones. I'm sure your family members are dying to know what you're doing all day long. But as a juror in this case, each of you is a judge of the facts. And until you have received all of the evidence in this case, it's essential that you abide by that oath until you have an opportunity to deliberate together at the conclusion of the evidence. So please bear in mind all weekend that admonition I've been referring to all week. And we will see you at 9 o'clock on Monday. Thank you, folks.
Please rise for the jury.
9:30?
9 o'clock. We're good, but thank you for the reminder.
You can leave your notebooks on your chairs.
Okay, we can be seated. Mr. Spees correctly reminded me that I had spoken with counsel earlier about the possibility we would have to delay our start due to the number of jury trials that are scheduled. The herd has been thinned, so we can maintain our courtroom and stay on schedule. We'll plan to be back here at 9 o'clock, ready to go, unless if now you're aware of something, or if over the weekend you send me an email, we can convene earlier if necessary. But if no one. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I apologize for trying to commandeer your schedule, Your Honor.
No, not at all, not at all. All right, we will be adjourned until 9 o'clock on Monday. Try to have a good weekend. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm not going to drag everything with me. Yeah.
One more. Okay.
You going to keep holding your dongle?
I'll let you know about that.
Okay, sounds good, thanks. Appreciate it.
Or I'll just put it with Mark.
You know what? I'll give it to you.